Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and as it's Sunday, I'm going to pick a topic myself. And there are a few common questions being asked, I've noticed, and discussed on the comments on the various videos with regard to the new independent group. This is the group of Labour and Conservative defectors that have formed their own little group, not a party as yet. And common questions that seem to have coming up is, shouldn't there be by-elections held in the constituency of these MPs? Why would they form a party? Wouldn't staying independent be better for them? Could they trigger a general election? And why not join the Liberal Democrats? So let's go through those in terms of my views on that. First of all, I need to make it clear in terms of where my bias is. I would never align myself with this party. I'm a Labour supporter. My policies are sort of on the left. And although I chiefly blame Jeremy Corbyn and his cronies for the situation that has arisen here, my policies are actually much more aligned with his. The people who've defected are what are generally termed as Blairites. They're on the centre left. Quite a lot of people where I am on the political spectrum will regard them as right wing, which is absolute nonsense. They're just to the right of us. That's not the same thing. To suggest they're right wing would be to suggest that we are centrist, which of course we are not. So that's where I am with it. But at the same time, I respect them because I understand the hatred that's been thrown their way. They've been made to feel, to borrow a phrase from Billy Connolly, about as welcome as a fart in a spacesuit within the Labour Party. So, they've left. So the first one in terms of whether or not there should be by-elections. Now, this is what people will say is, and quite rightly so, that these MPs were elected to Parliament on the strength of being in a particular party, whether it be Conservatives or the Labour Party, because at the end of the day, when you go and vote, what you've got is you've got a list of candidates, and by the name of each candidate, you've got the name of their party they represent, and if they don't represent a party, it just says independent. And a lot of people, being perfectly honest, will just scan down and look for the name of the party. They may not even know who that candidate is or care. They'll just tick for the party. So it is certainly true. No one seriously believes that if any of those MPs had have stood as an independent at the last election, that they would currently be the MP for that constituency. So the argument then goes, so now that they've left that party, shouldn't they step down and allow another by-election? Well, I would, of course, love that. As a Labour supporter myself, obviously I want as many Labour MPs in Parliament as possible. And we're now 8 shorter than we already were. This is not good. And in fact, in net terms, because you could say, well, the Conservatives have lost some too, but they've lost 3, we've lost 8. Not all 8 of whom I will, point. Actually, no, 9 now. Sorry, yeah, a 9th one who hasn't actually joined this new group, but 8 of them have. So yeah, we're 9 down now. 3 times worse off in many ways. But as much as I would prefer it if they did resign as an MP and trigger a by-election as a result of it, I also understand that that's not how it works. Although, yes, people such as myself have gone down that list and ticked off the Labour candidate, quite frankly, there was a time actually when I refused to vote for the Labour candidate, not where I live now, where I have lived about 10 years ago. And that's because I knew that person was not Labour at all. They were they're absolute disgrace. And so I refused. But generally speaking, you could put a red rosette on a chimp and I will vote for it because I'm voting for the party leadership to be able to carry out policies, hopefully get into government. And then that's what a lot of people do, even if they're not staunch supporters of a particular party. If they're swing voters, they will still vote for the party rather than the candidate. It doesn't always happen. There are about 8 or 9 independent, forget about this new group, but actual independents in the House of Commons anyways. And so not everyone always votes for a party, and certainly not everyone votes for a party that is likely to make it into government. Just the majority do. But yeah, that's not how the system works. How the system actually works is you vote for a candidate. If you want to make your decision based on the fact that they represent this party, that's up to you. But you accept the responsibility of acknowledging that that MP doesn't have to represent that party at all. Nothing in the system requires them to act in favour of that party. And, you know, let's face it, there was quite a funny meme last week about Jeremy Corbyn describing them as disloyal. It says, man describes Labour defectors as disloyal. The same guy who voted against his own party, was it something like 428 times? And those 428 times, by the way, that's not across the lifetime of him as a Labour MP. That is just specifically when Labour were in government. I think he hardly ever voted in favour of the government, his own government, the Labour government. So yeah, and that's because, of course, although he was the Labour candidate and remained a member of Labour, he kept voting against his own party because there was no requirement for him to act in the wishes of his party. He didn't step down and trigger a by-election and go as an independent, did he? And yet he can argue we could argue rather, just as he's arguing now, because what Jeremy Corbyn has said is these people were elected on a particular manifesto and now they've abandoned it, which also is a bit of a disingenuous thing to say because we don't know that they've abandoned that manifesto at all. He himself said when he was asked, what do you think they stand for? He says, I don't really know. They haven't said. So how do you know they've abandoned the manifesto? But, you know, we could well say he was elected as an MP during Labour's time in government on the basis of Tony Blair's manifesto. And yet he voted against it all the time. So there's a certain amount of hypocrisy about this whole thing, which I wish to stay away from. I just take the attitude, you know what? Our political system is not in tune with party politics. Party politics actually exist to subvert the normal democratic process. Here's the intrinsic pact. If you are a candidate, let's say I were a candidate for Labour in an election. Here's the pact. The party says to me, we're going to get our whole party machine behind getting you elected. Nationally, we're going to, run campaigns to get, people in your area to say, yes, I want to vote for that. And then you yourself are going to have all the local backing as well to get you elected. So when you are elected, you've been elected by local constituents. So of course you have a priority to those local constituents, but you also have a priority to the party. That's the pact. And the pact is that you will toe the party line, at the very least on manifesto pledges, because it's almost certain that a lot of your backing came from people who wanted those pledges made reality. That is the pact. Now, these guys, of course, have not wanted to do that in the end. Not because of the manifesto, really, it's because of the way they've treated. So they've left the party, which is what you'd expect them to do. And what a lot of people have called them to do. It says, well, if you don't agree with the way things are done, you should leave the party. And then they have. And it's like, hang on a minute. No. Step down as well. No, you just said leave the party. So there doesn't have to be one. Now, if the system were to change to take account of party politics, you could imagine a situation where we say, okay, parties are a thing. Our whole electoral process is going to change. So we're going to have national elections, not local elections, national elections, where I'm not suggesting this is a great idea, by the way, but let's just say, or maybe they work like councils, but on a county-wide basis. And each party gets a number of MPs for that local area, that region, that county, according to its share of the vote in that region or something like that. So you do something like that, some sort of proportional representation which acknowledges the party, the political party. Well, that would be okay, but that's a different system. Anyway, that's the reason why there doesn't have to be by-elections. They don't have to stand down. The reason why you have by-elections is when a sitting MP dies, they retire from Parliament, which can sometimes happen. Like David Cameron, for example, buggered off, didn't he? That's pretty much it. When an MP dies or retires as an MP, and decides not to be an MP anymore. I mean, of course, these MPs, it's not to say that they can't even, step down and trigger a by-election. They could if they wanted to, but they don't have to. And the thing I would also say to those people saying, oh, that's not fair because for Chuka Umunna, for example, I voted Labour and he's not Labour anymore. What I would say to this is, if you were really that bothered, you should take more of an interest in your local party politics and get involved. Because as a party member, if you are, not everyone who votes, of course, is a party member, of course not. But if you are that interested, then maybe you should think about joining the party. And if you join the party, do you know what? You get a say in who your candidate is. Get to know them. Go down to your local party meetings. Get to know people. You have your say on who should be the candidate, if you're that bothered. And if you can't be bothered to do that, are you really that bothered? Just wait for the next general election. Next one, it says, someone was saying, I was sort of saying, at some point, of course, they're going to form a party. And they were saying, well, why would they form a party? Isn't it better to be independent? At the moment, it is certainly better to be independent. Because as soon as they form a party, they're going to have to come up with a clear manifesto, effectively, what they stand for. Now, at the moment, all they're doing is pretty much what every party is doing at the moment, is saying what they're not standing for. That helps them attract more potential rebel MPs into their fold. And it could well be argued that it's not that they're keeping quiet what they stand for, more that they will wait and see who joins them, how it finishes up. And then they should, as a group, because why should it just be the first people who defected that decide what this new group will stand for? Wait till the dust has settled and everyone who's going to join it has joined it, and then decide. But at some point they are going to need to, because when there's an election, as I say, although there are some constituencies that have voted for an independent MP, this is rare. People get behind the idea of a party, and it's going to need to form a party. And not just before the general election, in enough advance to be able to get some campaigning going, and to be able to get across to people what they stand for and make it clear that they have a credible chance at power. Because, like I've said before, you do get people who vote for the party that they most agree with, which is, I suppose, the democratic way of doing it. But you get plenty of people who look at a manifesto. You might read multiple manifestos, and you look at them and you think to yourself, okay, I agree with that, but this party has got no chance of forming a government, so they will never see the light of day. These policies are never going to be enacted, because we're still in the mindset of majority governments, even though we have minority governments. So the bottom line is that most people are quite pragmatic, and they go, okay, let's say they actually quite like the Liberal Democrat manifesto, but they'll look at it and go, yeah, but none of it's ever going to be enacted because they're not going to become the government. And even if they became kingmakers and propped up a government like they did with the Conservatives, between 2010 and 2015, they're not going to be able to put a lot of it in there. Whereas if they look at a Conservative or a Labour manifesto, then they'll say to themselves, right, if they form a majority government, this is what they're going to do. They'll do other things as well, but they've pledged to do this. So it allows you, and this is why a lot of people vote this way, it allows you to consider that your vote is being used towards an actual goal, not just stating what what you would prefer to happen in like a daydreamy way, but in terms of what actually could happen. So they need to form a party, and they need to form a party that suggests to the general population that they could be elected to government. I think that's a massive stretch, but if they're going to be successful, that's ultimately what they're going to need to do. The next one, could they trigger a general election? So this is where things could get very difficult for them. I'm sure they'll be talking about this. They have the potential to... It wouldn't do them any good in a situation like this. This is why I've actually already said, without anything at the moment, Jeremy Corbyn, if I were him, I would be putting forward another motion of no confidence in the government. And again, and I said this last week, the reason I would do that is because obviously the Conservative MPs who've now, well, they're not Conservative MPs anymore, but they've joined this new group. They're going to vote in favour of the government in this issue. Of course they will. But what about particularly the 8 Labour defectors who have joined this new group? What would they do? Because if they vote in favour of Jeremy Corbyn's motion, then they're backing his stance, so he can't throw too much flack their way. But there's the potential, it's probably unlikely, someone did suggest in the comments they could probably safely do this, but it's always a bit dodgy with the numbers. They have the potential for, by their actions, triggering a general election. At the moment, that's the last thing they want, because at the end of the day, if they were to trigger a general election now, I can't imagine, it'd be difficult to imagine any of them retaining their seats, but you certainly wouldn't get all of them retaining their seats. That's not realistic. So they'd be acting against their own self-interest. However, if they were to vote to prop up the government, Jeremy Corbyn would get to look at them and say, look, there you go. They were Tories all along, which is exactly the narrative that the extremist left wing of the party, the real hate-filled people, wants to generate. This idea that they're actually just Tories that somehow got into the Labour Party, which is absolute madness. And they'd be able to do that. So Jeremy Corbyn wins either way. And even if, you know, they do back him and the Conservatives, the former Conservatives back the government, they sow party political divisions within that group as well. So either way, it can make it potentially tricky for them to try and attract more defectors, basically. So that's why I would have done it. But if 5 more Conservative MPs joined them, or even just defect on whatever basis, Theresa May would at that point, I think I've got my maths right there, it's either 5 or 6, I think it's 5, would then no longer have a majority, because at the moment her party doesn't have a majority. She's propped up by the 10 DUP MPs, for which she promised £1 billion worth of public money as a bit of a bribe. And then she wouldn't even have that. She'd have lost even that. So in order for her government to stay going, she would be reliant upon MPs in the House with whom she hasn't done a deal and she hasn't bribed. And that could put it on a very, very... She's already in a weakened position. That would put her in an extremely weak position. And when I say her, I mean she's coming to the end of her time as Prime Minister. Whoever takes over would be in a similarly weakened position, which could eventually just trigger a general election anyway. So they could, you know, if a few more joined them and they were minded, they could, but they would be acting against their self-interest. I think it's one of these situations where even abstaining could damage them. They may just all agree to abstain, but that wouldn't do them any good either. Again, in terms of how it's seen. So, you know, they could find themselves in the eye of the storm on that one. Right, and then the last one, it says, why not just join the Lib Dems? So this group, you've got a group of centre-left MPs and centre-right MPs. Together they make a centrist party. Grouped around the centre, not necessarily all dead in the centre. So what does that actually mean? And this is another reason coming back to why not form a party at the moment, because they've got to decide exactly what they stand for. You would think a party such as that would be not totally opposed to some privatisation of public services, which I'm definitely against. At the same time, must have social reforms, must actually have a compassionate society aspect to their policies. So a weird little mix there. But at the same time, you know, there is another centrist party, which is the Lib Dems. I would actually argue they were slightly centre-left. But they're centre enough that they were able to, for example, like 2010, 2015, which did them no good at the next general election because they were all punished very heavily. And that's why I describe them as centre-left, because just to give you a little bit of history. So they entered into a coalition with the Conservatives, something that Labour could never do, of course, but the Lib Dems could. They could quite comfortably fit in to a coalition with Labour very easily, or as they showed, the Conservatives. But the reason why I say, actually, when you think about it, they're mostly centre-left is because at the following general election, 2015, they lost a load of seats. they lost a lot of their support for propping up that Conservative government. So that just shows you that a lot of their supporters are more centre-left than centre-right, or even just dead centre. They'd much rather make a coalition with Labour. So why not just join them? I think partly because the Liberal Democrats at the moment are not seen as a strong party. They're still rebuilding. They're in a weakened state. It wouldn't do these MPs any good at all to join them. Therefore, they are... I mean, look at it. At the numbers at the moment, they've got exactly the same number of MPs as the Liberal Democrats. So the only thing the Liberal Democrats can offer is infrastructure, party infrastructure, but it's not a strong party. Remember, they want to attract many more members and become a much stronger party. They want to become bigger than the Liberal Democrats. You don't become bigger than them by joining them. And the other thing to say, however, is that doesn't mean to say they see themselves in opposition to the Liberal Democrats. They are, for example, it was revealed by Vince Cable, who's in the Liberal Democrats, that they are actually having regular meetings. So they, remember, MPs do have meetings with other MPs in the Commons and things like that, with things we may not always be aware of until it just is brought to attention. But they said that they are discussing ways to cooperate, not looking at it as a potential for joining them, but who knows? As I say, if their group doesn't really take off, maybe they'll feel it'd be better to join the Lib Dems than to remain as independents come the next general election. We'll just have to see how that pans out. But there is a lot of cooperation going on there. They are cooperating with the Liberal Democrat leadership in terms of what positive action they can make on the proceedings at the moment in Parliament. So hopefully that answers a few of the common themes that were coming up there, at least in terms of the way I see things. Back onto Brexit topics tomorrow. Don't forget the poll is still going for tomorrow's video. You can find that on the main page in the community tab. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter as well, because some people have been asking for podcasts. I have started to put these ones on podcasts. I'm a complete stranger to the world of podcasts, so it'll be slowly but surely. But I'm putting links to them automatically on Twitter as well. So thanks very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.